Hi, everyone. Welcome to our training tonight. My name is Patricia Idrugo. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and ella for Spanish. I am the Family Resource Center Supervisor of San Mateo County. I am very excited to have Disability Rights California tonight. We are going to learn more about reasonable accommodations in higher education. First, I just wanted to briefly talk about what we do, the FRC does in San Mateo County. We serve families who have children with disabilities or special needs between the ages 0 to 22. We provide parent-to-parent support, information, resources, and referrals to navigate the systems. We also offer support groups, trainings, and a resource binder for families. And we also have a monthly e-newsletter. So we invite you to connect with us, and we're going to put in our contact information in the chat. And I want to introduce my team very quickly. Sonia Valenzuela, the Family Support Services Manager, is here with us. And also Iris Wen, our FRC Training Coordinator. We're going to be recording tonight's training. For any families and providers who were unable to attend tonight, we're going to ask you for your collaboration and with the following guidelines. Please mute yourself when you're not speaking to avoid background noise. You can have your video on and off based on your preference and comfort level. We invite your respect through this training. We are going to have English and Spanish interpretation today. So sometimes you're going to hear in Spanish a little bit of maybe some of the minor background noise. Para los participantes que hablan español, para escuchar este entrenamiento en español, busque en el menú de opciones el símbolo del globo mundo y luego seleccione la opción de español para entrar a ese canal. We will have our Q&A portion at the end of the training because we are recording, and we are going to save your questions for the end. So thank you for your patience. We encourage you to refrain from sharing names or detailed information to protect your privacy and other families' privacies. And after you ask your question, please be mindful of making some pauses to allow the interpreters enough time to translate both the question and the answer. At the end of this training, we were going to be distributing a survey both in English and Spanish to collect your feedback on how this training event went for you. It will be anonymous, and it will help us to understand how to improve our trainings and future trainings. And last but not least, I just kind of wanted to actually turn it over to Disability Rights California. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Patricia, and your team for having us this evening. We truly appreciate everyone's time for being here. On behalf of myself, Lonnie Pfeiffer, Raymond Kwong, and Todd Higgins, your presenter this evening, I'd like to share a little bit about our agency, and then I'll turn it over to Raymond, who will then formally introduce your presenter, and we'll begin the training on reasonable accommodation to higher education. So we were formerly known as Protection and Advocacy. We're a nonprofit agency founded in 1978. We are federally mandated to provide legal services for people with disabilities. We work on issues such as special education, public benefits, regional center services, housing, employment, and so forth. Our offices are located in Sacramento, Los Angeles, the Bay Area, and San Diego. Our smaller offices are in Fresno, Ontario, and Modesto. I'm going to now go ahead and turn it over to Raymond Kwong, who will present your presenter today. Thank you, everyone.
Good evening, everyone. Our presenter today is Todd Higgins. Todd lost his eyesight as the result of a traumatic brain injury in 1983. He has been employed at Disability Rights California at the Advocacy and Community Engagement Group as a senior advocate since 2004 and has been working in the National Disability Rights Network for over 30 years. Thank you, Todd, for being a presenter today. So you can go ahead and take it away.
Hi, everybody. My name is Todd Higgins. Thank you, Raymond and Alani, for the introduction. And so tonight we're going to talk about reasonable accommodations in higher education. I apologize for being a little bit late showing up here. I'm just going to get over to my presentation here on my screen. Again, so the topic tonight is reasonable accommodation in higher education. And so what we're going to do today in this evening's training is I'm going to give an overview of the issue of reasonable accommodation and how people gained access to having rights as people with disabilities to get the services they need and accommodated in higher education settings, just to kind of give you a historical perspective of the laws that are at play here and some of the struggles that went into getting those laws into place. And then we're going to get into a more detailed discussion of kind of what reasonable accommodations are, the process to request an accommodation, depending on the type of college or university you might be attending. So that's my goal here, is to kind of give it the historical background of the issue and the laws and how they were created, and then get into a more detailed discussion of which laws provide protections today and how to request accommodations, and then how to appeal if those requests are denied. So the next slide, slide 2, the history of activism and disability rights. So I want to, this kind of began back in the early 1970s. There was a man named Ed Roberts, and he was a person who had polio, and he was attending Berkeley. He was also a person who spent time in iron lung because of his polio. But he was the first person who really pushed the envelope to get full participation on a university setting for a person with a significant disability. And so he really pushed Berkeley to have students like him not have to live in the infirmary, to be able to live in a dorm and attend regular classes. And Ed Roberts is largely kind of named as the person who started the independent living movement in the United States for people with disabilities. There are independent living centers throughout California and actually throughout the United States that are part of a national system of independent living centers. And it really all started in Berkeley with Ed Roberts and his efforts to be included in a university as a person with a significant disability in all aspects of college life. And so again, that was like 1970, 71. And then in 1973, through again the events and the efforts of Ed Roberts and then others who were also joining the disability movement at that time, the federal government passed a law known as Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And what that law said is that any entity, any place that received federal financial assistance had to provide people with disabilities accommodations and give them access to those programs that received any federal financial assistance. That was great that the law was passed, but they failed to pass the regulations to implement the law in 1973, and for many years no regulations were passed. And so what took place is, through again advocacy and actual civil disobedience, there was a sit-in at several federal buildings, one being in San Francisco, of people with significant disabilities to protest the lack of the federal government passing regulations for Section 504. And so what took place as a part of those protests and sit-ins in 1977 is then President Carter did finally push and got the Office of Civil Rights, U.S. Department of Education, to pass regulations to implement Section 504. And so it gave the law some teeth and really started, the civil rights protections for people with disabilities who are attending higher education institutions. Also around this time, just a little bit before 1977, the first special education law was passed for students with disabilities who were in public schools. And so that's how the whole special education movement started. Again, was right around this time in the mid 1970s. So, so for years after 1977, Section 504 was the federal law that provided students with disabilities attending college and universities with protections and against discrimination, but also to be to receive reasonable accommodations so that they could attend classes and participate in college university settings. And then, so that again, that was 1977, and then all the way until 1990, when the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, Section 504 again was the major federal law that provided protections and gave people with disabilities access to college and university settings and access to reasonable accommodations. Now, in 1990, when the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, there were provisions in the ADA which provided much wider protections and a lot easier access for people with disabilities to to get resolution and to file complaints and get get some impact or get a little leverage to be able to get college and universities to provide reasonable accommodations so that they could so that students with disabilities could participate on those campuses. And then also after the ADA was passed, California laws started to be passed to provide protections for people with disabilities. And those laws are the Under Act and the Persons with Disability Act of California. So there's these different laws that are California statutes that also provide protections to so that people with disabilities can get reasonable accommodated in college and university settings. And actually, even in some cases, the state laws provide a broader protection than the federal laws do. And again, the remedies, which we'll talk about later, are a little bit easier to access and don't take quite as long, from filing a complaint to getting some kind of action from where you file the complaint to get some help with your accommodation. So some examples of reasonable accommodations for college students with disabilities. As Raymond mentioned, I'm completely blind, so accommodation for me was preferential seating as far as where I could sit in class so that I could record classes at the time that I went to college. Also, it was additional test taking time, and I got to take my exams free of in a separate room with a reader who was able to read me the exams, and so that I could give my answers verbally, and my tests again were on time. So those are just a couple of accommodations that I received. But folks who are deaf or hearing impaired would have access to sign language interpreters. Also, for me as a visually impaired person, a lot of my materials were made available in Braille. And access was provided in those ways. As far as my campus living, I was given a dorm room that was on the ground floor without stairs, and I use a service dog, a guide dog, and so I was able to get a single room instead of a kind of shared living space because I had a guide dog. Again, so those are just some examples of the accommodations that I was able to receive. But essentially anybody with a disability, whether it be you know, a learning disability, a physical disability, or you know, really any kind of a disability that needs to be accommodated, can go through this process and get accommodated and from college and universities, and you know, get accommodations so that people can fully participate in the educational process. Okay, so the next slide are what are the laws that give students with disabilities access to reasonable accommodations and protections from discrimination here. So I'm gonna, if you indulge me for a minute, I need to flip over to another window where I have some other notes. So one of the publications that I'm going to provide to you after this training is called Disability Discrimination Fact Sheet. So it's and it's focused on college and universities. So it's called Disability Discrimination Fact Sheet, Colleges and Universities. And it covers federal disability and state disability discrimination laws. So college students with disabilities have protections against discrimination from college and universities, again, by both state and federal law. As I mentioned before, the Americans with Disabilities Act. So the Americans with Disability Act has essentially 5 different titles, and Title III covers places of public accommodation, and private colleges and universities are considered places of public accommodation. So basically anywhere the general public can go. The Title III of the ADA provides protection against discrimination and gives a person access to reasonable accommodations. So private colleges and universities are covered entities under Title III and need to provide protections to people with disabilities, college students who are attending those universities. And then Title II of the ADA covers state and local government programs. So any program that's run by a state or local government is covered under Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so this would cover public universities, so like UC Davis, UC Berkeley, any college university in the UC system, the community college system. So any public university or college would be covered under Title II of the ADA. And what Title II of the ADA says is that any program or service that's run by a state and local government needs to provide program access to people with disabilities so they can fully benefit from those programs. And then, as I said earlier, Section 504 provides similar protections to people with disabilities and any entity that still receives federal financial assistance. So a person has a choice. They can file with the U.S. Department of Justice under the Americans with Disabilities Act, or they can file a complaint through the Office for Civil Rights, Department of Higher Education under Section 504. So again, the 504 is still relevant, and it still is a law that can be utilized by people to file a complaint and get their needs met, provided those college or universities receive federal financial assistance. And most college and universities do fall under Section 504 because if they accept any federal financial aid or students that get federal financial aid, it's pretty easy to tie federal money to those college and universities. And so those are the federal laws, and then there's California law that provides similar protections. So the UNDER Act and the Disabled Persons the UNDER Act and Disabled Persons Act provide similar protections to people against discrimination and to be able to access reasonable accommodations at colleges and universities that are in California. And there's also a government code. It's 11135, provides protection against any entity that receives state funding. So any publicly funded college or university would be covered under this California code, which is 11135. And so what it says here is that Title III is also a violation of state law, but in some circumstances, state law is going to provide broader protections. And so if a person's experiencing discrimination or being denied accommodations, it's really important to kind of look at what law would be most advantageous. So they should definitely contact Disability Rights California to get some advice about which complaint to choose and where to file those complaints. So you can so the process for requesting an accommodation, you can request an accommodation for a college university at any time, and the request can really take any form. It's not required by law to be in writing, but we really recommend that if you're going to make a request that you put it in writing to create a paper trail. It just helps if you need to kind of prove that you've made contact, or you have an email or something in writing that you can show people if you're ignored, or if the accommodation isn't provided, or it's not provided in the way that you asked for it. It's helpful to have paper trail. And so the request should include a letter from your treating professional explaining your condition and what your need is for accommodations. We include sample letters on what to include in these letters in this publication that we provided you, and also information about the both state and federal agencies that provide protections against the laws should the request for accommodation be denied. So the state agency is actually the California Office of Civil Rights, and that information again is Lonnie's putting that in the chat now. Actually, in this publication that I've shared with you, this agency was formerly called California Department of Fair Employment and Housing, but since they're statutorily been given the authority to investigate all civil rights claims, they recently changed their name to the California Office of Civil Rights. And then we have the U.S. Department Office of Civil Rights, U.S. Department of Education Office of Civil Rights, and this is where 504 complaints would be filed. You would also file ADA complaints with the same federal agency, Office for Civil Rights Education. So what the ADA does, if the entity is an educational institution, they give authority to investigate these claims to the Department of Education Office for Civil Rights. You can also file, so if your school denies a reasonable accommodation or requests for an accommodation, or engages in discrimination against you, you can also file an internal grievance. Colleges and universities are required by law and by under the ADA to have a grievance process, and that needs to be The process needs to be detailed in the student handbook. So if you need to get information about that process at the college or university you're attending, I would recommend that you contact, usually most campuses have a Center for Students Disability Student Service Center. And so they have, most campuses have centers on campus that provide support and help to people with disabilities. And you could probably find out information about that grievance process there. If the college or university does not have such an office, my recommendation would be to contact the Dean of Students and ask them about what that process is, and also ask them to be connected with the ADA coordinator or 504 officer for that college or university. So again, the U.S. Department of the federal, so again, the state complaints will be filed with the California Department of Civil Rights, and then the federal complaints would be filed with the U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights. So what's important about federal complaints is that you must file them within 180 days of the alleged violation. So if the violation happened over 6 months ago, and you file after 180 days, they will not accept your complaint. And so, but the only exception would be if you're going through your internal grievance process of your school. There is an extension of the 180 days under federal law. But if you go through the internal grievance process and it's still negative, the outcome of that is still negative, you must file a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights under federal law within 60 days of that decision being rendered. Now, the U.S. Department of Justice also investigates alleged discrimination for private colleges and universities under the ADA. So again, the Department of Education Office for Civil Rights is really looking at more Section 504 violations and entities that are sure to receive federal financial assistance. But the ADA, as I said, with private college and universities, the U.S. Department of Justice also investigates complaints of alleged discrimination at private college and universities. And again, you need to file under the ADA with the U.S. Department of Justice within 180 days from the date of violation. And then you can look online to get information about how to file a complaint with the Department of Justice under the ADA, and Lonnie's provided that in the chat. And the link to that is also in the publication that we'll provide to you. And then the California Department of Fair Employment, or California Office for Civil Rights, rather, which was formerly the California Office of Fair Employment and Housing. And under state law, you have a year to file a complaint. So again, this is just an example of how state law provides broader protections because it gives you a little bit more time to file a complaint. But again, our recommendation is to file the complaint as soon as you know of the discrimination. That way, the facts of what happened to you are fresh, and it's more likely you're going to be able to gather those facts and get them into a complaint, and that complaint filed with the agency who can start investigating. And then Lonnie already provided a link to the California Office for Civil Rights where you can file complaints. You can also file private lawsuits regarding discrimination. But statute of limitations may restrict the timeline for filing lawsuits under these laws. And you can, lose your ability to make a claim if you miss the filing deadlines. And it can be as short as 2 years from the date of discrimination. And then additionally, but what we would recommend is that you, because Disability Rights California does not represent people in individual lawsuits against these types of entities, we would refer you to a private bar attorney who provided that reputation, who could inform you about what the statutes of limitations are. And then additionally, the Government Tort Claim Act so the Tort Claim Act requires that a complaint against a government entity. So if it's a public school or university that discriminated against you, and you're going to file a private action against that college or university, the Tort Claim Act says that you need to do that within 6 months of the alleged violation. If you want to seek money damages, you would have to file within 6 months based on what the Tort Claim Act says. If you're seeking less than $10,000 in money damages, you can also file a claim in small claims court, and that's an option available to you as well. And you can't use a lawyer if you go to small claims court, but there is information on our website about how to prepare and how to do that. Again, if you're going to pursue private claims, we really recommend that you talk with a private attorney who provides representation to individuals in private lawsuits. And then again, as part of the publication, we have sample letters to request an accommodation. And it gives kind of generic language on what to use when you're requesting such an accommodation, and kind of what you do need to say and what you don't need to say. And then more importantly, we give a sample physician or doctor verification letter. And what's important about the doctor verification letter is the doctor is not required to disclose your specific medical condition or really kind of personal information about what your condition is. They just need to verify that you have a medical condition that provides a limitation that requires an accommodation. And so it's very important to work with your doctor or physician, because doctors aren't trained to write these kind of letters or provide them. They don't know what the law requires them to put or not put. And so it's really important to talk to your physician or doctor when you ask them to write or provide such a letter, and caution them against not providing personal information about specific diagnoses, and expose you to expose your kind of personal medical record to people who really have no right to see it. They just need to know that you have a medical condition, and that you require, because of that condition, you require accommodations, and these are the types of accommodations that the doctor is recommending. So, all right, well, that's the information that I wanted to cover. And so I think what we could do now is open it up for questions and see if people have any questions about what I presented, or anyway, I think I'd like to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you everyone for attending our training tonight. Definitely appreciate that you're spending time with us, and it's a Monday evening. Thank you to our guests. presenters. Thank you, Todd, for being here, Lonnie and your team, Raymond, and our interpreters. As a reminder, we will be following up with an email tomorrow with the presentation and the materials that Disability Rights will be sharing with us. And thank you so much for your time, and follow us on Facebook, and our FRC website also has a lot of information. And if you have any questions, Iris is going to put our email in the chat. Have a great evening. Good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Todd,
Yep. Good night.
Raymond.
Thank you, Lonnie. Thank you, Raymond. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.